And now it's time for the Insiders with Chuck Qualla and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association.
Hi, I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
I'm Chuck Qualla, former Senate Majority Leader.
And we're the Insiders. And at the state capitol for the last few weeks, lots of people have been working on the issue of shared revenues between state and local governments. And it looks like there's a broad agreement, but we're beginning to see some disagreements on the details, Chuck, here with the Assembly and the Senate and the governor. Most recently, the governor saying he would veto it if the Republicans put in too many restrictions on how the money gets used. What do you think is going to happen, Chuck?
Well, I think the Republicans are engaged in a process here where they're saying, okay, we know that you're going to die, city of Milwaukee, unless something happens on shared revenue or sales tax or something. So let's put every restriction we can possibly think of, the fondest dreams of the people who hate Milwaukee the most, and we'll attach that. And it's a choice between you can die or else you can have that. And finally, the governor stepped in and said, I'm not going to allow that to happen. I think it's pretty straightforward. The Republicans are engaged and have been now for 12 years in a process of overreach, which is really startling. It's, they used to be the party that wanted local control. That is totally out the window with this on shared revenue. And in terms of taking care of the partisan advantage here, they've taken the small communities where they are now, of course, in dominant form. They are going to give some of them more than 1,000% increase in their shared revenue. And the city of Milwaukee is going to have to run through a lot of hoops and get a relatively minor amount of money. I think that this is overreach that is going too far. And at some point, people are going to say this is too much.
I think both the politics and the policy of this issue are really pretty complicated. And I was a little surprised a couple of weeks ago about the optimism. But now as they're getting further and further into the details here, I think they're beginning to see how difficult this is going to be. And there are differences not only between the Republicans and Democrats, but between the two houses of the legislature as well. So the state assembly looks at this situation. I think they're prepared to support the program statewide. But when they look at Milwaukee, they hear from Milwaukee that we're about to go bankrupt. We can't make our pension payments, and we can't keep enough cops on the street. So would you help us give us more money? And I think the response from the Assembly Republicans is yes, but we want to make sure that you're going to spend the money on the pension payments and on the police, because a previous administration in Milwaukee with a different city council went for 4 years without making any pension payments at all, which is part of the problem here, is that monies went there and then they didn't use it for those things. The Senate, on the other hand, I think wants to have a lighter touch on this. And there's a disagreement between the Senate and the Assembly about who should approve the sales tax increase in Milwaukee. The Assembly would like to have the voters have some say in it. And the Senate is saying, no, we'll just count on the city council and the mayor. So you might see the Republicans being able to resolve their differences, but then the governor weighs in. He says, no, let's just give them the money and trust them to do the right thing. I assume there's an answer here somewhere in the middle, but it may not come in time for the state budget. They need to really kind of strike this deal in the next 3-4 weeks. And I'm not sure that they're going to be able to get that done.
There are some reasonable restrictions. Scott is right. There are some things that should be done. For example, I think it makes every bit of sense and the city may not like this, but to say we're going to put the city and the county into the state pension system. That makes sense. The state pension system is one of the very best in the country. Some would argue the very top. Fully funded, really well done. Takes away a huge problem and liability for the city. However, the city will have some real significant financial responsibilities for that. And that's where the state budget can step in here. We're in a good spot where we actually have money. That I think everyone should agree on. And that is not something the city would necessarily want, but it should be done. And I think it makes sense. And this is the opportunity to make that happen. It won't happen otherwise. By the way, backdrop payments, we could talk about that. I'd love to talk about that, but not part of our conversation now. But Scott is right. I kept hearing, oh yeah, we're going to do this shared revenue thing. And I'm thinking, I know the Republicans have these restrictions on. Is the city really going to buy into that? Is the governor going to buy? And now we're starting to see where the rubber meets the road and they actually start looking at the details of it. This has got some problems in front of it. And by the way, if it doesn't happen in the state budget, I don't see where this happens. So it is the one must pass bill. That's why Scott and I put probably 90% of our energy into this in a 2-year process. So I think Scott would agree, because it's the one bill that has to pass. And if you don't get it there, it's not likely to happen when you have divided government. But it is interesting to add on top of everything else, at least in Scott's day and my day, Scott and the governor, the Republican governor, usually Tommy Thompson, were pretty much on the same page. And, the Democrats, they just had our house and that was it. But now you actually have, like you say, Scott, you have differences in the Republican side. It's like, who can be more extreme, or they might not see it that way, but who can put more restrictions on a democratic environment? Because we're not going to do anything for Milwaukee that my people would like unless we really make it draconian. And I think this is creating a situation where you can see how hard, because Republicans have been in control for so long, how hard it is to govern with that kind of attitude.
It's always easier to pass a simple bill than it is to pass a complicated one or a simple proposal. And there's no way that with shared revenue that it will ever be something simple. So I think this is going to be one of the big challenges of the state budget, is whether or not they can get this done and get it done on time.
We agree on that. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to The Insiders with Chuck Qualla and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association